Welcome to the College Admission Lab from Khan Lab School. I'm your host, Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling, and I am joined today by two special guests. First, our founder, Sal Khan. Sal is the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, Schoolhouse.World, and Khan World School. He's also author of One World Schoolhouse, which he published in 2012, and more recently, Brave New Worlds, How AI Will Revolutionize Education and Why That's a Good Thing. And he holds 3 degrees from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Welcome, Sal. And our other esteemed guest is Karen Richardson, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Princeton, where she's been since 2019, and previously she was Dean of Admission and Enrollment Management at Tufts University. And Karen's career in education has also focused on K-12 public education and administration. She serves as Deputy Superintendent for Boston Public Schools and was the Program Director with BPS for the Office of Teaching and Learning and Director of the Exam School Initiative. And Karen received her bachelor's degree in politics from Princeton and also holds a master's degree in education from Harvard Graduate School of Education. So there you have it. So thanks for joining us, and we're going to use the Q&A for all your questions today, but also the chat. So if you want to go in the chat and just share where you're zooming in from, we'd love to hear from you, and whether you're a parent or a counselor, what your kind of affiliation is or student. So Karen, maybe you could just kick it off and give us we've heard Sal's background before in the last webinar, and maybe you could just give us a brief education kind of overview of your journey in education.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me here this evening. It's nice to be here with both of you. I will say that, I grew up actually not far from Princeton, a very small town in New Jersey. It felt like a world away. I was telling Brennan earlier, I grew up on a dirt road in a small town called Roebling, New Jersey. Neither of my parents went to college, but they were determined that all four of their children would. So I'm the youngest of four, so I did benefit from my older siblings having that experience. My brother Bob actually applied to Princeton. He's 5 years ahead of me in school, and he actually went there. So I'd had some experiences, but I was determined I was going somewhere else. He's the one who encouraged me to apply to Princeton because he had had a good experience and saw the things that he benefited from, the opportunities on campus. So I ended up working there or going there. My first actual role in admission was my work study job. I worked in the admission office all those years ago. I was a politics major, as you said, and after I graduated, I ended up moving down to Washington, D.C. and working on Capitol Hill, as politics majors do. But I always had it in the back of my head that education was something that I was interested in, and access to education especially, because again, I saw how it had benefited me and my family. So I ended up going back and getting my master's in education, and then quickly starting to work for the Boston Public Schools in, as you said, a few different areas. And then I realized that college admission was, I think I would have been a terrible admission officer right out of college, but after having experiences, I realized that I wanted to work on the college side of things in exposing students and families to opportunities. And so that's how I found myself at Tufts. I was there for 11 years in a few different roles, first as Director of Diversity Recruitment and Undergraduate, and then Director of Graduate Admission, and then as Dean of Admission and Enrollment Management for that last 3 years. And then this position at my alma mater opened up, and I couldn't not apply. Again, because Princeton has meant so much to me in my life, and I was fortunate enough to get the job, and I can't believe I'm in my 6th year at this point. COVID times are weird times, so sometimes it feels like I've been back for 10 years. Sometimes it feels just like a couple of years, but here I am, and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. And I guess you can take the woman out of New Jersey, but you can't take New Jersey out of the woman, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So, Sal, maybe I'll start with you because the two of you share this history of working in Boston public school system with students, and maybe you could talk. I'll have each of you just say a little bit about maybe how that early work in the Boston public school system kind of informed your approach to education and in Karen, your case, college admission.
Oh, well, actually, for me, it was those early days, although we've done some work with Boston Public Schools since then, but it was Brookline Public Schools. It was when I was an undergrad. And it's one of these things we talked about in the last webinar where, even though I never allowed myself for my identity to be like an identity of an educator, I kept gravitating towards the question of like, how do you help people realize their potential? I kept working on these software projects. And at some point that they were education focused when I was an undergrad, and even before that, even in high school. And I remember it was, I believe, our junior year, I think it was junior year in college. Someone had reached out to, I don't know, some professor at MIT and said that Brookline Public Schools, they were losing funding for their gifted program. And if there were some MIT students who wanted to come and essentially be substitute gifted teachers. And it was myself, and I asked my freshman year roommate. We weren't roommates anymore, but we're still very good friends. He was also from Louisiana. That's when I first met him. Actually, I'm in his house right now at a Christmas party. But we said, "Hey, you want to go drive?" And he had a car, so that was I needed someone to drive us over as well. So say, "Hey, Sean, you want to?" And he actually now runs Google Education. But I was like, "You want to go and tutor some or work with some of these kids?" And we did, and it was some fourth graders and seventh graders and I remember it was at Brooklyn Devotion School and Brookline, not Brooklyn, Brookline. And I mean, it was a pretty interesting experience. Obviously, we weren't like the headline teacher, so we didn't have to deal with a lot of had to happen. We were just kind of jumping in every now and then, a couple of times a week. But yes, quickly learned certain dimensions that I personally really enjoyed about education, how fun it is to work with some young people. But there was definitely some classroom management skills that we were lacking. And I remember there was this one day, and somehow there were these fourth graders on, like, literally on a table standing, and like Shantanu and I look at each other, we're like, how did this happen? Like, what are we doing wrong here? But anyway,
And it's one of those what's the movie? Oh, I can't think of it. Where they stand, Captain My Captain, where they stand on the.
no, it wasn't part of what we were trying to do. We didn't encourage them to sit on the table. They just realized that we were not good at managing the classroom.
And now you're running Khan Academy, and he's running Google for Education. So it all starts there. Karen, how about you? What's the kind of influence it's had on your work in admission?
Sure. I would say, it's probably the job that I had with the exam school initiative. So Boston Public Schools, of course, has Boston Latin School, Boston Latin Academy, and the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science as their exam schools. And my job, this was in the early 2000s. The school department had received some federal funding to try and encourage more Boston public school elementary school students to be thinking about applying to the three exam schools. And so, just like Sal was saying, I think it was about access and potential and realizing potential. The job was about creating summer programs, summer tutoring programs in math and language arts, but also it was really about communications and marketing to families who didn't really think about this wonderful opportunity right in their own backyard as a free public school. And so a lot of the work was about engaging college counselors and current students at the three exam schools to talk to our fourth and fifth graders and their families about their experiences at the exam schools and to really encourage them about that. And I think I take that away from that work. It's about, people might know Princeton, or they might not know Princeton, or they might think about 1950s Princeton, and it's changed a lot. And so I think I take away from that work, you have to continue to talk about a place and what it's about and how it is and can be accessible to students. So that's what I take away from my time at Boston Public Schools.
Great, thanks. By the way, it was Dead Poets Society was the movie I was thinking about. So
Yes.
that's a good segue into the question I wanted to start with around kind of mission, right? And how you you've worked at two highly selective schools, at Tufts and Princeton, and um, they're both very mission driven. And how do you look for students who kind of um, jive with that mission, and how do you assess the potential? I mean, you were talking about just now kind of recognizing potential in students. How do you do that in admission?
Sure. So when I think about Tufts and I think about Princeton, both of them, as you said, are mission driven and really have this goal of turning out young adults who are going to make a difference in society. And it doesn't matter, the schools are not saying that this is the difference you have to make. It's about giving students the opportunity and the perspectives to be able to think about challenges and problems and come at them from various perspectives. And so our job in the admission office is to bring together a class and to sort of jumpstart that community that's going to come together and do that. And so we are always talking about looking for students who want to engage in respectful conversations with others on campus, but conversations that will challenge each other and will challenge people who have different perspectives to think about things from a variety of different ways. So we think about that as one piece. We think about who a student will be, not just in the classroom, but as I like to say, in the common room and on the field and on the stage and in the dining hall. How are students going to engage with other people, their peers, their professors, their advisors, to come to different perspectives and to really address different questions. So, we're also always thinking about students who are willing to step outside of their comfort zone, students who are willing to take some risks when it comes to their academics and what they might decide to study. And we look at this holistically from a lot of different pieces in an application, from the students' essays to the recommendation letters. It's really about trying to figure out who a student is and who they might be on our campus.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I mean, Sal, as you talk with students, kind of the other side of things, and there are a lot of juniors are kind of kicking off their college search right now. How should students think about kind of a mission-driven college search, about looking at the schools they're applying to and not, looking beyond the rankings and beyond the name of the school and thinking about kind of the mission of the school and who they're trying to serve and how they might kind of mesh with that vision?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, the one thing that I sometimes see students falling into, I've seen this. I mean, I did it actually very similar to Karen. You apply where you have a sibling already, and I remember my sister was going to Brown, so I was like, oh, I will apply to Brown, and someone had told me about. So there is a lot of that, and we even see that. I see that amongst young people today is that if they see someone that they respect and they identify with, who was maybe a few years ahead of them, they oftentimes will maybe get a little bit of comfort saying, hey, maybe I'll go down that same path, and that might make a lot of sense. It made sense for Karen with following her brother to Princeton. I'm sure I would have been happy following my sister had I done that. But I often try to challenge students a little bit to kind of carve their own path. They might have seen a kid at their school who's a little older who looked similar or was similar to them, or a neighbor, but the more that they can really dig deep and say, well, is that really what I'm about? And not be afraid to kind of get into a different swim lane if that's where they more naturally is. And it's funny because a lot of my life has been kind of defining my own swim lane, and it's a deeply uncomfortable place to be when there's no one else doing something similar. But I've seen the pattern over and over again that those are oftentimes the most interesting places to be. And I've never been an admissions officer, and Karen could speak to this, but my sense is in a place like Princeton, there's just so many deeply qualified students. And as Karen mentioned, you're trying to build a community. You're not just trying to stack rank the students based on some dimension or some 2 or 3 dimensions. You are trying to build a community that will be enriching for everyone. And and I got to believe it's interesting to have some of these kids who are in these swim lanes and these their own swim lanes. And I also don't think you should make that artificial either. You shouldn't say, "Oh, I heard on a webinar about college admissions that it's good to be quirky or it's good to." That I think, and every admissions officer I talk to, I think they get very good at spotting authenticity versus inauthenticity. But once again, dig deep, and it's hard sometimes if you're 16, 17, 18 years old. But if there's something that captures your interest, something you're excited about, go for it. And for college, I give both two pieces of advice. Like, yes, it is good to look, and I'm curious what Karen thinks of this. Maybe we'll have slightly different viewpoints on this. It's great to look for schools that seem to resonate with who you are and what you want to be. At the same time, I remind them, Buddha says attachment is the cause of all suffering. and there's only so much you can glean from a website and even a campus visit and webinars, et cetera. And you and I have told a lot of students there's no right decision. It's all about making the decision right. And there's so many really impressive, amazing schools, especially in the U.S. I mean, schools in higher ed in the U.S. is really one of our strengths as a country. And if you go and take a positive mindset and lean into whatever college experience you're going to have, it's going to be a great one. So yes, carve your own lane, look for places that you think you're going to really thrive, but you're not going to have perfect information. But wherever you end up out of this process, which is sometimes a little bit Byzantine, make that decision right. Be that student there who becomes a leader on campus, does interesting things, takes advantage of the campus.
Yeah, that's a great point. Karen, do you want to build on that? Because I mean, this kind of idea of, maybe a student's identified things about Princeton that really resonate, and how do they kind of expand that out?
Sure. No, I absolutely agree with everything that Sal was just saying. I do think that it's important to think about the things that are important to you as a student and not just academically, right? Because the truth is you spend more time outside of class than you do in class when you're in college. And so the other secret is that you will probably change your mind a few times about what you might want to study, and that's okay. So you want to make sure that you're looking for places that are also going to keep your interest beyond just the classroom. And it's thinking about the size of a school. It's thinking about the location of a school. It's thinking about, do you want to be in a place where you recognize every face every day when you walk across campus, or do you want something larger than that? And I do think that, as you said, the information you're going to get is never going to be complete or perfect in learning about a school. But I do think that schools have gotten much better about websites and about virtual tours. And if you can get to a university or a college to visit, I encourage you to get outside of the admission office propaganda because we're going to tell you all the good things, right? I would encourage students to go and eat in a dining hall or at the student center and eavesdrop on current students. How do they talk about things? How do they talk to each other? How do they interact with one another? Read the daily newspaper or the weekly newspaper that students put together. You'll learn a lot about the vibe of a campus that way as well. And I also think that if you look at websites and even at supplemental questions that colleges might be asking, you can glean information about what's important to a college or university and their values from those pieces. And if it doesn't resonate with you, that's probably a sign that you want to look at other places.
Well, and that's great because I mean, I think it's also about asking kind of the same questions to lots of different people on campus and seeing if some of the answers kind of triangulate, right?
Exactly.
Are they and sometimes that's pretty telling. Sal, did you want to? It looks like you were going to say something.
Oh no. It's I'll just reinforce I agree everything Karen just said, and yeah, I just remind students. And actually, I'm curious what Karen thinks of a school like Princeton. I have no doubt it's easy for a lot of students to fall in love with it. At the same time, it is not an easy school to get into. So what advice would you have for students or families listening who are trying to like balance that, whether it's Princeton's their dream school or another, peer school like Princeton, where they love everything about it, but you have a very low single digit acceptance rate. And none of us want kids to be anxious or, feel like I didn't get into Princeton, now my life is over, whatever. So how do you recommend families balance that really hard tension?
Sure. And I think the third piece I would say to that is that Princeton is also not for everyone, right? And you shouldn't, and I think when I was an admission officer here years and years and years ago, I think people were surprised when I would say, don't apply here for the name. Don't apply here because it's a beautiful campus or because somebody you know went here. I told you you should too. See, my brother gave me all that advice. Apply because there's something that resonates with you, and that's why you could see yourself here. But it's true. We are fortunate to have the reason that our admit rate is so low is because we're fortunate to have a number of applications, but also we are fortunate that we have a very high number of students who say yes to us when we say yes to them. So, that limits the number of students we can admit because we can't over enroll and not have housing for everyone, because that's a key part of the experience here. My advice is always to think broadly and to think about there are a lot of wonderful schools here in the US and around the world. And I do believe that students end up in places that are good fits for them. And as you said, I think it's important that no matter where you end up, that you take advantage of all of the opportunities that are there and make the most of the experience. But yes, you should never tie all of your experiences or all of your, this is who I am, all of your identity to one school. You really do want to think broadly about the places that could be a good fit.
Well, and thank you. I mean, so Sal was talking a little bit about authenticity earlier, and there's also this question from Tommy in the Q&A about if everyone is quirky, then how do college admission officers determine who fits best for their school? Is there a way to stand out in this regard? Any thoughts on that?
So, I don't think that everyone is quirky and not everyone should be quirky, right? Everyone should be themselves. And I think that's the important distinction. I'll give an example. I think, I'm often asked about, well, I think to get into a place like Princeton, I have to be well-rounded when it comes to my extracurricular activities. And I honestly think that we use the term well-rounded too much. Colleges want to know who you are and authentically who you are and the things that you're interested in. And I think that students tend to fall into a couple of different buckets, right? So we have the students who are generalists who have explored a lot of different things in high school. Hopefully, they've gone a little bit deeper into at least one area, and aren't just flitting around from thing to thing, activity to activity, once per year, but going a little bit deeper. And then we have the specialists. So I always use swimmers as my example of that, right? So swimmers spend a lot of time in the pool and might not have time for a whole lot of other things. Doesn't mean that a college campus doesn't need that type of student. So both the generalist and the specialists are important. And what's important is that you do the things that are important to you and that you enjoy. And that's when the authentic excitement comes through in the application.
Well, and kind of the opposite of that, there's a question here. Sal, maybe you can talk about this one. It says admissions seems like a game parents are playing. Agents help them make applications catered to universities. How do you deal with this? On the surface, that doesn't look genuine at all.
I mean, look, I don't think I think there's, unfortunately, there's some truth to it, at least to the perception of it. I mean, definitely people perceive that. And if you go to upper middle class, well affluent parts of the country, unfortunately, yeah, there are people who are paying $500 an hour to get these experts, self-declared experts to help with college admissions and things like that. And I think that's a mixed bag. On the other hand, I've seen kids that are, they're driven in a good way. They're authentic about what they do. They put real thought into their essays, and those, I think, do just fine or even better than some of the students that might rely on that. But I'm curious, Karen's take on it. Like, do you are do you feel admissions officers are able to glean that? Because I wonder about that sometimes too. Like, I tend to be pretty skeptical of it. When I find out that that's going on in a family, I tend to, I tend to not sometimes value some of the accomplishments, because I'm like, okay, that's kind of been engineered by someone or by a staff of people, as opposed to the student. And I probably still have a chip on my shoulder from being, this kid in Louisiana with not
Yeah.
knowing about any of this stuff, and hindsight realizing that that's what I was competing with. But I'm curious, Karen, like, I'm sure you get a good number of applicants who might look like that. Are y'all able to spot them? How does that affect, if you can, or do you kind of, it's all good? How do you think about it?
Sure. I mean, so I would say that more often than not, it is easier to spot if a student's application has been scrubbed so much that it just is not a 17-year-old's voice anymore. And again, because we keep going back to authenticity and wanting to know who the student is, we recognize, right? We're humans, and we all were 17 once. So when we're reading applications, we are thinking about students in that time of their lives. So an application that comes in that is so sort of slick and smooth that we do not believe that it has been written completed by the student, then that usually doesn't turn out so well, because again, we're trying to determine really who a student is and who they will be on the campus. And if essays or extracurriculars have been so curated to, try and be this perfect applicant, then that's not helpful to us, because again, we're not seeing what is really interesting to a student. I think that's the challenge. I think that's one of the mistakes that applicants make, is they try and fit into a box that they think we're looking for. And there's not one thing that we're looking for. We're looking at the student and their accomplishments and their interests and who they want to be and who they might be on our campus. So the short answer is that yes, more often than not, it is usually easier to tell if the work has not completely been done by the applicant.
Well, and part of the looking at a student individually is kind of looking at the context that students come from, right?
Right.
And the
Exactly.
context of their environment, but also the academic context.
Mhm.
We got a bunch of questions. There was a report recently released from Just Equations about the use of calculus in admission, and the inequity in this country about access to calculus in many high schools. And can you talk a little bit about how you look at like a student's academic background, and also maybe even especially this issue of calculus? And are you looking at that as this kind of must-have to make a student look like they have a rigorous curriculum?
Sure. So, I will always start with, our job is to ensure that students who we admit will feel like they can be successful academically on our campuses. So we never want to admit student who we a student who we think is going to really struggle, that is not fair to that student at all. So when we're looking at a student, we are looking at them within the context of the secondary school that they attend, and looking at what are the courses that are available to that student. Are they accessing some of the most rigorous courses available to them? That does not mean that if a school offers 30 AP courses, that a student should have taken 30 AP courses. It means that they should have accessed some of those highly rigorous courses, because that's what we're going to ask them to do when they get to campus. The issue of calculus, especially, again, if a school does not offer calculus, we cannot expect that a student has taken calculus. The one time that it is important for us, for Princeton, is if a student tells us that they want to study engineering. We absolutely do have to look for calculus, because that is the only way that a student is going to be able to jump into the math curriculum that is available to them on the Princeton campus. But it is not, calculus is not the, we're going to throw out applications if we don't see calculus on the transcript. That's just not true. We are always using the school's own school report or their website to see what is available to students. And it's also why the counselor recommendation, the letter that a counselor writes, sometimes counselors will tell us that due to budget cuts or something else, that's other unforeseen circumstance, calculus wasn't offered in the year that the student would have taken it. So that's all about context as well. We're always adjusting for that.
Thanks. Sal, any thoughts on this? I mean, I know you've done a lot in this space.
Yeah. Well, first, I always declare my love of calculus before I give any critique of it. It's a great, and I used to always say, well, people really don't use calculus in their life, even if you often, I was a STEM major, et cetera. But, and obviously I've spent many times, maybe at this point, hundreds of videos myself teaching calculus on Khan Academy. I think there is something about the subject matter that it is abstract. It does to engage well with it. You need to really have to have mastery of all of the foundational mathematics ahead of it. So I think it is probably, I'm guessing, a pretty strong correlate or predictor of how well you could do in a rigorous, probably not just STEM, but I would say in a lot of programs that require a lot of critical thinking. I do think, I completely agree with Karen that, regardless of what you think of calculus, if you go to a place like Princeton, and even if you are just as bright or brighter, whatever that means, than a lot of your peers, but if you're coming in and already it can be a heady experience for a lot of folks because someone's, comes from a family where a parent is a governor and someone else is a CEO and this and that. And then if you're not academically ready and like everyone else is taking calculus or more advanced courses, and it can be a tough environment to get ramped up in. So my advice, actually, and this is a plug for what I do out of my day job, is this is why Khan Academy is there. We also have schoolhouse.world where people can get free tutoring. Go learn that calculus on your own. And I think a lot of the students who could be headed for a school like Princeton actually are very capable of going to a site like Khan Academy and learning the calculus at a very rigorous level. They can get support on Schoolhouse. They can then teach calculus to other folks. And by the way, not that this is everyone's path, but you do something like that, Karen, you tell me if I'm wrong, I think that would look pretty interesting on an application. Hey, my school does not offer calculus, or it only offers calculus at this level, but I really wanted to learn it. So I went to Khan Academy, learned it by myself, and then I'm teaching it to other people. And I don't want, the 300 people on this call to just go run and do exactly that. But
Exactly.
but
Too late.
We now have resources that you should not be completely gated by the resources that your school has. That's why Khan Academy exists. That's why schoolhouse.world exists. And I do think, sometimes even at Khan Lab School, when I'm encouraging sometimes kids to take some more advanced courses or things like that, I try to check myself. Look, we're not doing it because I'm trying to be like a gunner type of advisor or something like that. It's more of like, no, look, this will help you have confidence. And when you're going there, wherever you go to college, if it's a very rigorous college like Princeton, maybe you'll have to take this class again, but you've seen it already.
Right.
And you're going to, and especially that freshman year when you're all this stuff, you're forming friends, you're trying to figure out your place in the world, your identity, and there's people coming from all walks of life. You'll have something to anchor on. So yes, I actually think we're doing a disservice to kids when we're telling them not to learn calculus, even if it is available in their communities.
And Karen, are you seeing any other trends in kind of high school course programs and things like that that stand out to you? Whether it's acceleration through high school or students taking more dual enrollment courses, or any trends that you see as you kind of have watched over the last couple of years in admissions?
Sure. I think that there definitely has been a larger proportion of students who are engaged in dual enrollment courses. Some for, as Sal was mentioning, because certain courses might not be available through the high school. And so students are accessing either a local community college, or maybe a local college is teaching a class through the high school environment. I've seen much more of that happening. There are also more students who seem to be doing more sort of online courses that are then sometimes part of the transcript or not. Sometimes the online courses are sometimes harder to sort of verify what the course is about, especially if it's not a class that's being taught through the high school, or it's not a full-on dual enrollment course. But I think that we're definitely seeing more of that in the past couple of years.
Thanks. And Sal, maybe the question you can start with. There's a question here in the Q&A. What advice do you have for applicants torn between taking more AP courses to look good or AP tests to look good versus pursuing passions outside of academics?
Well, I think, the to look good is the operative words there. Don't do it to look good. I mean, you might want to take a few, and look, I make it tangible. I think, and Karen, once again, you check me because you're the expert here. But I think if a student has taken over the course of their high school, it doesn't have to be APs, it could be dual enrollment courses, it could be IB, or it could be some other evidence of a rigorous college level type of material. If you've done, I don't know, 3 to 6, 7, 8 max. I look. One of our product managers at Khan Academy took 20 APs. I asked him about it. I don't recommend that. I don't think that's a good idea. But he was just into it, and I actually think he did it authentically. He didn't do it to impress anyone. He's just one of those guys that when he gets obsessed with something, he just goes all the way. But the operative word that you said, Brennan, is to look good. Don't do it to look good. Yes, you do need some data points, as I said, maybe 4 or 5 data points to show that you're capable of rigorous work once you get to college. And I think beyond that, yes, you should focus on your passions. And your passions don't have to be a success. You can fail. In fact, sometimes failure makes you a lot wiser when you're young. I will go the other way though too. I've definitely seen some young people who will, because sometimes it's not as fashionable to give the second piece of advice where they're like, it's all passion, but unless you've kind of shown some evidence of rigor on some standardized measure, whether it's dual enrollment or AP or some standardized test scores, that's also going to be a hard path. Because I think most selective colleges, their first order of business is, okay, is this person, when they come to our campus, going to succeed academically, as we were talking about? And then, yes, when there's so many applicants at a place like Princeton that could potentially succeed academically, then we're talking about who's going to really enrich the campus and be a leader and make a difference in the world. So yes, balance. And yeah, you definitely in my head, Karen can tell us otherwise, you don't need 8, 9, 10 plus APs.
Right. I mean, the thing is, I think that it also depends on what you are interested in studying, right? And so knowing that sometimes those ideas will change, Most students who decide that they want to be in the STEM fields, they might change what that science is or what type of engineering that they might do, but they're probably going to sort of stay in that area. So yes, we are looking to see, has a student really challenged themselves with math or with the type of science that they're interested in? Or for our engineers, have they challenged themselves by taking a higher level physics class? Those types of things. So you will see, and we do see students who have taken more than 8, 9, 10 APs. And it depends on the school, right? Every school is a little bit different. Some schools will limit the number of APs classes that a student can take. Sometimes they can't take them in 10th grade. So I hesitate to put a number on, but you are absolutely right. You should not do it to look good. You should do it because they're things that you're interested in studying in high school. And the only other piece that I would say is to make sure that you're keeping your foot on the gas in senior year. I think that's the challenge that we see. Sometimes students will get through 11th grade and then they'll say, well, you know what, I want an easier 12th grade year. And that's not what selective colleges want to see. We want to see that you are continuing to challenge yourself and that you're keeping your grades up even after you've been admitted.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's so interesting to see some of the questions coming in through the Q&A and through the chat about just kind of, you know, is this extracurricular all right? And is this going to set me up in the right way? And does this extracurricular that aligns with something, or does this course that I'm taking align with what Princeton is looking for or other schools are looking for? And I think what we're saying here, right, is that you need to kind of check the why of why you're doing things, right? The what's the ultimate goal? And like you said, Sal, you know, like what are you trying to achieve, right? And if it's just for college, you shouldn't be doing it. And so as people think about, I'm not answering some of these questions in the Q&A because they're so specific to specific types of, like, you know, is this all right or is this all right? And it's more about kind of what your goals are. And just to get practical for a minute, Karen, there was a couple of questions about deferrals, and we are in that time of year when a lot of students are hearing back from their early decision schools. And if a student is deferred, how should they think about that? What should they do? Kind of what are the next steps?
Sure. And, you know, I think that has to be at an individual level of each school. I can talk to you about how we think about deferrals, but you know, other schools might think about it a little bit differently. When we defer a student who has applied through our early action process, it's because we want to see them in the sort of context of our larger pool. And sometimes that means we want to see more grades. We want to see, you know, how the pool looks for the engineers who are applying those types of things. So one concrete thing that students should definitely do is to ensure that their school sends any mid-year grades, any updated grades to be included with their file. Um, Again, school by school will say this differently. We always tell students that we have the information that we need, except for, you know, sending in your grades as they are coming in. If there are substantial awards or happenings that have happened since you applied, then you are welcome to send that in either through the portal that you've created or to our office. And you don't need additional letters of recommendation. We already have the recommendations that we've asked for. You are welcome to send a letter of continued interest if the place that you have applied continues to be your first choice. But most importantly, make sure that your school is sending in any sort of updated grades.
When I would say maybe even more importantly, make sure you are moving on in some respects, right? That
Absolutely. I mean, because there's no guarantee, so you should definitely have already started on some other applications or have some others submitted as well.
Sal, I'll maybe let you take a stab at this one. When the question is, when planning for the summer after junior year as a computer engineering interested student, what should you consider most? A character building, job selling donuts, an internship in STEM or STEM summer program?
Oh boy. Um, I, I, I would put it down to what is the thing that gets you most excited, and it's going to be the richest experience. And it goes back to even some advice I've given to people older who are looking for jobs, and they get, oh, I'm looking for a job in this industry and I want this title, and I'm like, and I keep reminding. I remember when I was in business school, and it was a really tough job market, and people, this was 2003, and the dot-com bubble had burst. It was probably the hardest job market for MBAs in many decades, and I was in student government at the business school, and there was one employer who was really upset because they put a job posting out and no one applied for it. And this was in a tough job market where most people weren't getting jobs. They weren't getting jobs at the places they thought they wanted jobs, at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and da 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 da. And the person who put up the job, it was a backhoe company. A backhoe is the things that dig on the back of a tractor, multi-billion-dollar company. And the person who made the posting was the CEO of the company and was looking for his heir apparent, the person to be the future CEO of this multi-billion-dollar, and not one MBA applied for the job. And it just shows you, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying, but people just get into these lanes and then they get pretty narrow-minded about these lanes. And when I found about it, I was like, maybe I want that job. Like, I might be able to, but, and he literally filed a complaint. I only knew about it because I was in student government. We're like, oh yeah, we got to get the word out to our peers that they have to be more open-minded about where they apply. But I say that's kind of my answer to this question, is like, look who it is. Look who is your mentor. A lot of people get obsessed with a role or a company, but it actually matters who's going to be that person who's going to be teaching you things when you get there. Are they going to invest in you? Are they going to give you interesting experiences? My first job, I know this is an internship question, but my first job out of college, it ended up being, the gentleman who I reported to, he for various reasons couldn't travel that year. So he made me do all of his travel, and he was a much more senior person, but I was able to learn so much out of that experience. So yes, I would say out of all those options, which one's going to get you the best experiences, the best growth? And I would guess, I'm curious what Karen thinks, that that's probably the one that's going to be best for college, if that's what you care about.
I'm going to tell my own story. The summer after my junior year in high school, I worked at the Acme supermarket. I started as a bagger, and then was a cashier. And you know what? I learned a lot about how to interact with people, and it was an important part of my experience. So, and that went on my college application. So.
And I'll tell you even a reverse story. My summer after my junior, it was junior year, or maybe it was beginning of senior. Well, I got rejected at McDonald's. I got rejected at Wendy's. I just wanted to make some money. And I was completely naive about the college application process. I didn't know what looks good, I wasn't even thinking about it at that point. And, I got rejected at all these places, but I was taking a math course at the University of New Orleans. And the professor there said, oh, I have some extra research money. Would you want to come work for me? It looks like you know how to program, and I heard you don't have a computer at home, and I'd love to, get you. And as naive as I was, I thought this was something that this was like my fault. I didn't want to do it, but I was just like, well, I do want access to a computer. And, now that's like, wow, if you could get a job like that, that's great. Yeah. But it's just an example of a lot of times when you're naive about things and you just follow the path that is most interesting to you, or almost the universe is calling you to, that is maybe something that will call you. And so, anyway, I think there's all sorts of story. We had I know a student who, had to work at as a cashier and open up early, and wrote one of her essays about that and things like that. And that's an amazing story. And what it's like at 5 a.m. and having that life as a high school student. And anyway, follow the thing that calls you, not what you think other people think should call you.
Exactly.
Great advice. So as we're wrapping up here, just a couple last questions. Karen, there's one here. If you're a person who does deep dives into subjects on your own, how do you best demonstrate this aside from grades and that academic work?
Sure. So definitely, telling us about it, writing about it. It might be the subject of one of your essays. It might be something that you tell us about in additional information. It might come in the form of if you're working with um, someone at a local college or doing research or some sort of a job. It might come in the form of an additional recommendation letter, and that person can tell us more about it as well.
Great, thanks. And then Sal, so as students begin their lists, they develop their lists, and some seniors are thinking about kind of they might have been deferred or denied early decision, and now they're thinking about adding more schools. Can you talk about this idea? Some college lists are so scattered and are kind of ballooning, right? There's this trend where students are applying to more and more colleges. Can you talk about kind of the odds, the math of applying to more selective schools and kind of how that works?
I I don't claim to be an expert here because I see where the logic comes from, where you have many schools with well under 10% acceptance rates, and if you feel like you're of a student, you're like, hey, I feel like I'm in the zone for a lot of these schools, but it does from the student and family point of view feel somewhat arbitrary where you're going to get in. I can see the hey, if I really want to have a high probability, I should just apply to more and more. So I definitely see that. I don't know what the optimal number is. At KLS, we try to guide folks to that kind of 10 to 15 max, but I know families that have gone to 25, 30, not at KLS, but other places. And for some of them, it was successful. It does feel very hard to put the energy to do that much. And you're actually asking other people to put the energy too, whether it's the school and all that. So I tend to gravitate more to what we have told a lot of families, like focus your efforts. And I think if you're a strong candidate, 10 or 15 should be plenty. One thing I do remind a lot, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's amazing how many students there's 4 or 5 schools that they've either heard of, they've seen on some rankings, they saw in a movie someplace, or they know someone else who went there. And then they all cluster around those 4 or 5 schools. And it's a different 4 or 5 schools depending on the school, the geography, et cetera. And I'm always trying to remind students about, well, have you thought about this place? Have you thought about this place? We even see that at KLS, where it's like, 5 kids will apply to this one school and no one has applied to this other school that in my mind is comparably strong and could be great if you have the right mindset to go there. So yes, I encourage them to look at the don't get attached. Go to a place that's most schools are going to have great resources. If you can find other students who are going to challenge you and make you better, you're going to be really, and you take a positive attitude, you're going to have a great time.
Thanks. And so, Karen, last question here. As we wrap up, any parting wisdom for students and parents kind of entering into this experience right now? Like what's your one take home you want them to remember?
Wow, so many take so many take homes. I just building on what Sal was saying is, don't get attached to a set of schools because you've heard of them or because they're in a certain league or anything else. Apply to the schools um, that you would be happy going to, that, if you were admitted, you would be happy to say, yes, I am signing up and I'm going to arrive there in the fall. The other thing I would say is and I realize it's easy for me to say on the side of my college admission experience and on the side of the table, but take control of the things that you can control, which are, keeping your grades up, challenging yourself, taking the time to, craft your essays, asking for recommendations from people who know you well and really like you and want to be your champions to people who don't know you. They're introducing you to the admission committee. Um, and then once you hit the button, and do not wait until 11:59 p.m. on when before the application is due, once you hit that button, let the process happen, right? And enjoy your senior year because it's the only high school senior year that you get.
Well said. Well, on that note, thank you both for your time this evening, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. And we will return in January with our next in the series. And wishing you all happy holidays, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.